So there's a new legislative ballot measure in California that I thought contained some intriguing provisions. In the evening of Sunday, June 30th, 2024, Senate Bill 1381 was gutted and amended to contain a proposed ballot measure by the legislature to place on the November 5th, 2024 general election ballot. The amendments were adopted on July 1st and substitute new authors for the bill. SB 1381 would have also amended Government Code, Health and Safety Code, and Penal Code provisions, not only amending them, but also adding new ones. The bill also calls for an election, so it would take effect immediately upon enactment. SB 1381 requires a majority vote, according to the Legislative Council Digest key. Basically, the purpose of Senate Bill 1381 is to provide an alternative ballot measure for the voters to consider. It was backed by Governor Newsom and legislative leaders to quote unquote crack down on property crime and fentanyl. The measure contains 5 findings and declarations that would be made by both the legislature and the people. These are contained in Section 1 of the bill. At the end of the bill, so in between sections 1 and then 8, there are a number of substantive changes to, again, the Government Code, the Health and Safety Code, and the California Penal Code. At the end of the bill, there are several intriguing plus sections. They're contained in sections 8, 9, 10, and 11, and several of the subdivisions. So the first one is Section 8 of the bill, which contains a severability clause. Now, I've talked a lot before about these, and it basically means that if any provision of Senate Bill 1381 were held by a court to be invalid or unconstitutional, then the other provisions of the bill would not be affected and would remain in full force and effect. Now, there's debate among legal and legislative drafting scholars whether severability clauses are actually necessary because there is a judicial presumption that remaining valid provisions will stay in effect. Now, some might argue a severability clause is duplicative, but I find that a clause is often used in contentious or controversial legislation, such as this measure, that they're anticipating may face one or more legal challenges. The next interesting plus section is Section 9A of the bill, and it provides that any other ballot measure on the same subject, including amendments to Prop 47 on the November 2024 general election ballot, will be deemed to be in conflict with this legislative ballot measure. As a result, if SB 1381 were to receive more affirmative votes by the electorate, then it goes into full effect and any conflicting ballot measure shall be null and void. Now, this is standard language most often found in initiatives to ensure that only one approved ballot measure takes effect rather than have a potential patchwork of provisions among approved measures. The state constitution requires the measure with the most affirmative votes to take effect. Next is Section 9B of the bill, and this specifies that if SB 1381 and a conflicting measure on the November ballot are both approved by voters, and the conflicting ballot measure is later invalidated by the courts, then SB 1381 is to be given full force and effect. I think this is kind of unique language because it would have the effect of having SB 1381, if you will, spring to life if the courts invalidate any conflicting measure. Next, there's Section 10A of the bill, and this states that certain sections of SB 1381 amend Prop 47 from the 2014 ballot and must be submitted to the voters and approved by them at a statewide election. And this provision is necessary because Prop 47 changes proposed by SB 1381 must be submitted to the voters for their say. Next up is Section 10B, which calls a special election for November 5th, 2024, for the voters to approve SB 1381. Section 10B also specifies that SB 1381 will become effective when it's submitted to the voters and approved by them at the November 5th election. Now, this special election, the bill says, is to be consolidated with the general election held also on November the 5th. Finally, this provision says that the consolidated election shall be held and conducted in all respects as if there were only one election and only one form of ballot shall be used. The legislature, under Article 4 of our state constitution, may call an election by enacting a statute to do so. To reduce possible voter confusion and save taxpayer funds, it would be appropriate to consolidate the special election with the general fund. With the general election one already scheduled for November 5th. Then there's Section 10C, and it's basically a carve out from provisions of state law. It says, despite the requirements of a half a dozen California Elections Code sections, the Secretary of State is required to submit SB 1381 for voter approval at the November 5th, 2024 general election. It also says that these provisions of state law deal with SB 1381, and because 1381 is outside the normal time period, 131 days, and beyond that for the next election, these sections of state law effectively have to be waived, and direction is given by statute to the Secretary of State for her to place this measure again on the statewide ballot. Finally, there's Section 11 of the bill. It simply states that this act calls an election within the meaning of Article 4 of the California Constitution and shall go into immediate effect. Now, Section 8C3 of Article 4 says statutes calling elections, statutes providing for tax levies or appropriations for the usual current expenses of the state, and urgency statutes shall go into effect immediately upon their enactment. So among the several provisions of SB 1381 is again calling a special election for the statewide electorate to consider adoption of the bill's provisions by the voters of the state of California.